catch the sun and never give it back again. I'll catch the sun and keep it for my own. And in a world when no one understands, I'll take my outstretched hand and offer it to anyone who comes along and tells me they're in need of love, in need of hope, or maybe just a friend. And perhaps in time I'll even share my son with that new anyone to whom I give my hand. Look! I'm gonna grab it. Perhaps in time I'll even share my son with that new anyone to whom I give my hand. I'm gonna catch the sun, I'll give you the moon, I'll catch the sun.
Ted Hamilton with the Brian May ABC Melbourne Show Band. And I'm delighted to welcome to our studios Ted Hamilton OAM.
That's old Aussie mail, is it?
How are you, my friend?
I'm terrific. Thank you, Alex.
Now,
good to be here, mate. And hello, listeners.
It's lovely to have you. And your bio says singer, composer, playwright, entrepreneur and actor. You've done it all.
Oh, I used to have a number plate that long and I couldn't park my car anywhere. The number plate was too long, you know.
Ted, we're going to have a few questions and answers, and I know we're going to play a couple of pieces of music. We just heard one that you did way back, but you were born in 1937. Tell us where.
Mm-hmm. Sydney, in the home, in a little home in Station Street, Ryde.
Ryde.
My mother had me at home.
Right.
Yeah. Ryde, New South Wales.
And were your parents in the business, or was there any...
No, they were in the business of survival, I think, pre-war. Yeah. It was the Depression we'd come out of. My mother's family had to walk off their property.
Oh, really?
In Leeton and Griffiths, and he was quite a wealthy landowner, Paddy White, and they went bust, as a lot of Australian families and worldwide did during that terrible time. And my father's family, the Scots-Irish side of my line, the Hamiltons, they were in the army and the police force, I think, to a large degree. I didn't know much about them because my mother and father separated before I was born.
Oh.
And, there was my father went to the war in 1939. He was in the first troop ship to leave, I think, 6th Divvy on the Queen Mary, and... off they went to fight in the desert, in the first campaign in the desert before Rommel,
right?
When they were fighting mostly the Italians in the desert war with English troops. And there was an animus that existed all lifelong, and my mother put me into St Joseph's Home, Croydon, and I was raised by the nuns in an orphanage until 1943, when my father returned from the war and took me out of the orphanage.
Right. And did you live with him from there on? Or?
I lived with him for a couple of years only.
Right.
He was a man that was terribly bruised by the war, as a lot of them were. He drank too much. He was traumatised by it. Bit violent, very angry about my mother because she was involved with an American officer. As a lot of the Australian women were. Life goes on.
Yeah.
And he could never get over that. And he was in love with her all his life, and she detested him. I don't know why they got married. But I had no family in a sense. My father took me out, and I ran away from him and found my real mother. And then I lived with her for 2 years, the same result. Too much anger, too much bitterness to contend with for a child. So I went to live down in Woolloomooloo to a hotel and finished up living in a 4-storey walk-up bordello. How very interesting.
famous people lived in a bordello.
That's right.
Billie Holiday for one.
That's right. Well, the funny thing about it, Alex, is in King's Cross in those days, it was basically Australian renowned, that on the left side of William Street going down toward the city were the prostitutes in Palmer Street, and on the right side of William Street in Woolloomooloo were the sailors' girls. They called themselves that because they weren't prostitutes, but they went out with all of the sailors that came in with the ships, all the time. And they'd have a boyfriend for 3 weeks. I'll see you again next time I'm in Sydney Port. It was one of those things.
How did you get involved with music? You started early, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I always loved it. And I went on to the Australian Harry Yates Amateur Hour on 2UE. I was only 11 and I sang My Foolish Heart. Is that a bit of a challenge or what?
At 11?
At 11, My Foolish Heart. And I remember the guy saying to me, why are you singing that song? It's very difficult. But I had a good ear for music and I liked music, and I was later learned to sight read music. But in those days, I just had a passion for it. And I heard that song in a thing called My Foolish, a Dana Andrews picture or something with Susan Haywood.
That's right.
And that was the theme song of it, and I just loved it. The night is like a lovely tune.
It's a beautiful piece.
And it became one of my signature ballads with the Australian All-Stars and Don Burrows, and I used to sing with them. I used to do it. Donnie Burrows liked it. He said, Teddy, sing that My Foolish Heart. He liked that a lot.
And you sort of went into the clubs around 1955.
Yeah, well, I was actually, the first sort of professional gig I got was at Checkers nightclub.
Checkers?
I was only 17, and I just returned from the bush, and somebody heard me singing at a football club.
Right.
And that someone was called Perscalier. Perscalier was a very colourful gangster underworld character, flamboyant owner of racehorses and threw money all around. John Singleton sort of emulates him today to a degree, perhaps without the darker side.
Right.
And he took me down to Checkers, and I met a guy who owned Checkers, Dennis Wong, and I did the Late Show. Norman Erskine and myself were the Late Show, and that was at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow, that is a late show.
That's right, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. He did the Late Show, and that's the way it was in those days. Because I couldn't do the early show; I was too young, too prominent, too many others to be around. But in the late shows, in those eras, in the clubs in Sydney, all the knockabouts were in. The bookies, the jockeys, the all of the sharp guys and gals. Go, Teddy, yeah, mate, yeah, and all the footballer guys, and it was great.
Yeah,
in those days you could up
would have been
your
exciting
age.
For your age too. I mean,
it was fabulous.
Mixing with all that.
It was fabulous. Yeah. And you could dock your age up, no problem at all. Now, I look like the baby-faced killer, when I was 21, I used to have to prove that I was 21 to get a drink, because I looked 12. Yeah. And it's a funny story, when I did the captain of the Love Boat, that's what they said. They looked 12. They looked like you escaped from a cabin and put the captain's costume on.
That's right.
So I looked very young, much younger than I was even. The only thing that probably saved me was I was fairly strong and tough, and I was a street kid, so I had a sort of demeanour, if you like, that made me a lot older, because I ran with older characters and did older things,
So you graduated from club work, and you might have kept that going, but then radio came along.
Yes, yeah. Well, actually how that happened was it happened before I did the clubs.
Oh.
Because I was up in Newcastle on the Australian Pines and Products, and it got washed out in the 55 floods.
Right.
I went to get a job in Maitland, rebuilding the bridge between Maitland and Singleton.
Because that was a big flood that time.
It knocked the bridge down. I was second truck in that. That's another story. Should have been washed away with the flood when the bridge broke. A clap of thunder like only God could duplicate. And the bridge broke, and the truck in front of me, there were two trucks in front of me, and I was number 3 truck, coming down the slab, and the water was running over the bridge, and then around the corner came this incredible body of water, and the whole bridge just went crack, and away went the trucks, and I jumped out of it and ran up the hill in the Maitland, in the main street, and then I finished up working for the Army because I could drive all the stuff. I was working on a timber plantation, so I could drive the D8s, I could drive the Blitz buggies, I could drive all of the stuff that they needed, the big, 4-wheel drive and 8-wheel drive trucks, the Maple Leafs. And I got a job with them cleaning up the town and rebuilding the bridge, and I sang in the pub. Aye. This is a funny story. I started as a bouncer in the pub because I was into unarmed combat, and I was instructing unarmed combat in the commando units with a guy called Hal Morgan, who was in charge of all of that. And I was pretty good at it. Mm-hmm. And we got into a fight with this other timber plantation. It used to be outside of Bulahdelah, and we were Newcastle Tea Gardens. And the fight broke out in the pub because it was the only dry place in Maitland. And it was up on the High Street Bridge, near the High Street Bridge. There's a famous piece of film where the guys picked up off the lines and dropped onto the telegraph lines.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
We were standing on the bridge watching that. And this fight broke out. And anyway, myself and this big mate of mine, Stan, we cleaned up about 3 or 4 of these roosters. And as it turned out, the guy that I know was the tough guy of Cessnock, you know, and I was lucky. I got him early and got him and knocked him out. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I was king of the kids then, right? So the guy comes over and he says to Stan and I, "What are you guys doing? I want you on the door here, you know, blah, blah, blah. We're having a bit of trouble." So we said, "We've got 12 quid and keep." Now I'm working on the bridge. Mm-hmm. We're doing volunteer work and cleaning up and driving the stuff, and I'm working on the bridge and I'm singing at night and earning 12 quid there and keep. I was going pretty cosy, mate. Very good. I went to Newcastle, and Newcastle at the Prince of Wales Hotel held a talent contest, and the prize was Hayman Island trip, right, with the girl, and I was running with Miss New South Wales at the time, country New South Wales, beautiful girl, Karen. And green-eyed beauty, and I was very tempted to take it. Or an audition in Sydney and a weekend at the Rex Hotel. Ah. Now, I wasn't old enough to stay at the Rex Hotel and book in, but I won it. And I took the audition in Sydney because I was singing around the coalfields. I loved it, in the pubs and doing all that stuff. Right. You know, and I'm bouncing on the door one night. You're going to love this with Stan. You know, we'd only been on the door a couple of nights. And anyway, this altercation broke out, this guy, and I'm listening to this group singing. So we quieted it down. I'm listening to the guy and he's singing. I said, "I can do better than that." And the bloke said, "Well, get up and sing a song." So I sang about 3 or 4 songs in my best imitative style of Johnny Ray and that, but there was a lot of excitement in it, you know, and all that stuff. "Walking my baby back home, please don't talk about me when I'm gone." And the group was quite a good group, you know, a good country group. So he came over to me, he said, "You're off the door, mate." He said, "Look at their scorty here. We're going to pack them and you're going to kill them." So up went the salary and I became the singer off the door, not bouncing. So that was how I started up there. And then I came down and did the audition for the Gladys Moncrief show. Wilbur Kentwell at the organ, and I sang "Just One of Those Things, Just One of Those Crazy." And she wanted a bit of light, you know, sort of jazzy, swingy sort of stuff on her show, Gladys Moncrief.
She was always a little bit
Lady of the Mountain, yeah. And she said, here's our latest discovery. You know, this is Teddy Hamilton to sing "Just One of Those Things" with Wilbur Kentwell at the organ.
Was she a nice lady to work with?
Very distant, remote. I mean, sure. I was only a kid going onto a show, and it was all of those people, like Kennedy and all of those guys in those days. We were so self-conscious with stardom. They didn't know how to handle it in Australia, and the only way they did was isolation, which became, they read about it in America, to be a star, act like a star, don't talk to anybody.
Yes. Now, I've played from time to time on my Sunday night program, in the Sunday night special, a Ford show, and one Ted Hamilton comes up from time to time. How did that all come about?
From the Gladys Moncrief show.
Was it?
Yeah, I did the Momakaki show, Calling the Stars. I was booked to do that with Lashwood, Harry Lashwood, Lau Lashwood and all that. Hello, young Lasho, you know, with Momakaki. Yes. And I did one, Calling the Stars, and there was a guy called Darcy Fitzgerald who was the producer.
Yes, he was indeed.
Very prominent radio producer in those days. And Walter Pym at the microphone, you know, and Bruce Mansfield's uncle. What was his name? Terry Deer. They were the big announcers in those days, you know, with all their pomp and pageantry, you know, as they were in those days. And I got this call. We'd like you to come in and have an audition for the Ford show.
I went in. Network.
And I met Bob Gibson.
Great orchestra leader.
Yeah, and what a band. And the personnel in that band, mate, was the who's who of Australian music in those days.
It comes across, even now.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You know, but you had Ron Folsom, Alan Nash, Dickie McNally, Mal Pierce on trumpets. You had John Bamford, Jack Grimsley, Norm Gubbo, Arthur Hubbard on trombones. You had Jimmy White, Frank Marcy, George Thompson on bass, Johnny Wing guitar. You had Jock McKenna on bass baritone. You had Charlie Munro on alto. You had Don Burrows on alto, alternating with Charlie. You had Errol Buddle on lead tenor with Claire Bale alternating. They'd play first or second tenor together.
What a memory.
Yeah, but what a band. What a band. Every one of those musicians became very well known in their own right. It was a terrific band.
And you hadn't heard a lot of those recordings since you'd...
I haven't heard them since they were done. And Jeffrey Orr, God love him, contacted me and sent me, look, I'm a collector director, I've got these Ford show things. He sent them to me, and I said, Jeffrey, I haven't heard these since 1957. Nobody gave you a tape. Nobody gave you a video.
No, exactly.
You had no facilities. It's like you're talking 1956, 57. I mean, nobody considered archival, or keep this, or we weren't conscious of, we had no managers. There was no such thing as a manager in my day.
Yeah.
No such thing. No. There was a central casting booking agent. That was it.
Yeah. Now, radio, okay, so TV comes along in 1956.
Yeah, I did the first show in 1956 for the ABC.
ABC.
Yeah, they had heard me singing at a jazz club up in King's Cross called the Arabian Coffee Lounge with the Ken Morrow Trio, and they took us and they did a show called Around the World in Song, half an hour, New Year's Eve. John West announced it.
John West.
Yeah, from the ABC Gore Hill Studios, this is Ted Hamilton and the Ken Morrow Trio. And some American guy did the comparing of it. But I sang 8 songs. Cindy, Oh Cindy, Kingston Town, all of these songs that were big hits. That was the hit parade, was basically.
I love it.
You love this. They had sets for it, Alex. You know what they were? It was one set. The studio at Gore Hill, the new studio, was as big as this studio. And they had these 8 little sets set up, like something you buy in cardboard today at a Bunnings or something, that you erected yourself and put a cardboard up with a like I can remember Kingston Town. It had a, what do you call, a life jacket, with a thing, and I stuck my head through the middle of it to take it.
No.
It was unbelievable, mate, and I'm jumping up and down in these little cardboard sets singing all these different songs, and that was New Year's Eve 1956.
Now, a little bird tells me 1961 you were comparing IMT.
Yes, I did.
On Monday nights, was it?
I did. I alternated with Graham. There were a few of us that did that.
Why did he ask for? Did he ask for you, or
I
how
think,
did you get the gig?
Well, Graham, as I understand it, was always a big fan of mine because he always brought me down for his big shows. If Graham had a big show, they brought me down from Sydney. I did a lot of work with Tony Lamond.
Lovely singer.
Yeah, Bev Harry and people like that, and the lovely girl Gaynor Bunning, the local wonderful girl singers and stuff like that that I worked with. And he used to like to bring me down because I always did a special number. I love to do special numbers.
Yes.
And I'd arrange them and do all different things, with Dick Healy and the good arrangers, like Peter DeVissa arranged that I'll Catch the Sun.
I'll Catch the Sun, beautiful.
He wasn't with Nine, he was with the ABC. But so Graham was always... But Graham was a very distant, aloof man, as Melbourne was with Sydney for some strange reason.
It's weird, wasn't it?
Yes, and I was a sort of star in my own right and a national name, which is why they brought me down for when Graham went national. I did the show. They brought me down and things like that. But Bert and Graham were always very complimentary of me, but very distant. You didn't mix with them. I mixed more with Noel Ferrier and other people like that who were good drinking mates and stuff like that. And I did a lot of the Noel Ferrier shows. They used to bring me down for that Friday night. And Ray Taylor. You might remember the Ray Taylor show.
I remember the Ray Taylor show, yes.
I came down to Melbourne a lot to do those shows.
Another thing that I'm interested about is the commercials. You were involved with a lot of the early TV commercials.
Oh, Mick Potter was a big one in Melbourne for years and years and years. Hi, Mick Potter. Oh, hi, Mick Potter. The classified ads. If your batteries are acting ornery, holler from Marshall. All the singing ones for cigarette. Collide it, you'll like it. Crave an aching size filter. Boot, boot, boot. Because I was the lead voice and I had over 3-octave range, and I could do the falsetto then before it was popular.
Right.
So in a vocal group, it was terrific. I'd sing the tenor lead, and then go to falsetto when you got into the harmony parts of it. So, and I did all of those early commercials, McRobertson Land, Kodak, all of those big ones. Louis the Fly, I'm the guy, the narrator of Louis the Fly. Neil Williams was actually Louis, and I was the voice. One spray and Louis the Fly, apple of his old mother's eye was Louis. Boom, poor dead Louis, Louis the Fly, a victim of Mortine. Mortine, and I was at the vocal group, along with the Deltones, Pee Wee, the big bass singer.
Wilson, was it?
Yeah, he couldn't read music, but had a lovely, rich, bass voice. And I used to double him because I could go down to a bottom F. And I double him down there on those things. One spray and Louis the Fly. Da-da-da-da-da, because I could read and he couldn't, so he'd follow me. But he had a wonderful sound. And so that was it. And I did all of those commercials for years and years. And Neil Williams and I were probably the most used singers, I think, in Sydney,
at that time.
for those national commercials. And Bruce Clark, who was a very prominent Melbourne
guitar
musical
player.
identity, guitar, had his own studio called the Bruce Clark Jingle Workshop.
Yes, he did indeed.
And there was another guy called Bill Armstrong.
Oh, yes.
And they used to bring me down from Sydney. And I'd do a day's commercials for them, top tail, 15 second, 30 second, and all of those radio station things, 2WG. But, I did all of those things for them down here.
Well, Bill is still involved with Golden Days. He produces our CDs that we issue from time to time.
Oh, that's great.
He's the producer of those.
Yes, I haven't seen him for many years, but Bill was
lovely man.
Yeah.
He's getting on now, but he still gets around and comes up our stairs.
Well, the song you just played, I recorded at his studios in Bank Street,
That's
South
right,
Melbourne.
Bank Street, South Melbourne. Now, you at the time that all of this other business is going in show business, you were a sportsman too. Squash,
Yeah.
Squash?
Yes, squash.
World champion or something?
Yeah, we were in the I was in the undefeated Australian team. We nobody could beat us. We had 5-men teams in those days, and any one of us could play number one on a given night. Hisco, Hunt, myself, Nancaro, Carter, Parmenter. They were the gold. It was the golden era of Australian squash, and from 1960 on, when the English first came out here in '59 and they kicked our butts royally, 2 years later we just wiped the floor with them. And we had a very virulent squash life for a while, and I was in the Australian side, New South Wales side and Victorian side.
Keep you very fit.
So I was the only guy that played for the two states and Australia. And the only match I ever lost was with Victoria versus New South Wales in the final when Jeff Hunt was supposed to play Ken Hisco and he got sick and I had to step up one. And Kenny beat me 10-9 or something in the fifth. And it was the only chance Victoria had to win it.
Well, let's move on now to this particular part of your career. I'm talking about a Crawford production into air on Channel 9, 1969 to 1973. This might just give our listeners a clue. Speak of Division 4.
Or in the Italian, quarter quattro divisioni.
Now, your role was, Senior Sergeant?
Senior Constable Kevin
Constable
Dwyer.
Kevin
I finished
Dwyer.
up Senior Constable. I started as a very humble servant of the Majesty's Police Force as Constable Dwyer, but I finished up Senior Constable Dwyer, which I reminded them only last year when I got pulled up on a traffic accident in court.
How did it come about? Did you really? How did it come about you getting the role in Division 4?
I did an acting thing, Last Train to Quinto for the ABC. It was a half-hour Australian drama series that they tried to promote, which didn't go anywhere in those days. And somebody had seen me in it and called me up from this show and said, look, we're doing a show called Homicide. This was Crawford's Homicide, police show, and we'd like to have you come down and play a role in Homicide. So they gave me this good role of escaped convict, and apparently I did a good job on it. I've never seen it to this day, so I don't know.
Really?
Yeah. And the next thing I know, I get a call from Hector Crawford. He said, Ted, we'd like you to come to Melbourne. Well, I was used to coming all the time for Channel 9 and other people. I said, fine, Hector. He said, I want to talk to you about a show. We'd like you to do an audition for a new police show we've got coming up. I said, oh, great. What's the role? He said, it's a police constable. I said, oh, okay. So off I went, and I came down, and I did it at Channel 9, actually. And I did the audition, walked in, and there was Hector with his board and select panel and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I did the audition. I thought I was bloody awful. I'm not a good auditioner. I never have been, Alex. I hate it. I was the same in the States. I just can't audition. I did. I'm terrible. And I thought, oh, well, I've blown that out the water. And I went home to the hotel where they put me up at the Federal, and next thing I get a call. I go back to Sydney, and phone rings, blah, 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 blah. Ted, we'd like you to come down and discuss contract terms, blah, 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 blah. Or your manager. And I said, manager? What manager would that be? There weren't any such people, and well, good, we're happy to talk with you. So And in those days, you talk principal to principal. In these days, there's a lot of crap goes on. The TV channel people think they're above you and all that stuff. Far be it for me to discuss that.
Yep.
So, but in those days, you did. And I went down and I discussed it with Hector personally. And I was a national name, and I was the only national name in the cast.
Yeah, because the others were pretty much unknown at that time.
That's right. Gerard had done a few guest appearances on shows as an actor.
Gerard Kennedy.
But he wasn't what you call a household national name.
Right.
Division 4 made him known.
Yeah.
And Terry Donovan was very little known. Tuck Faulkner was a newsreader from Channel 9 in Sydney and had no real, because don't forget there was no national networks in those days,
exactly.
and outside of Sydney nobody knew much about Chuck.
No.
So I was a national name, and that's why they wanted me, I think, more than my acting ability, in truth, because I had come out of Division 4. The stage shows I had done with Helen Zerafos, The Music Man, and then I did The Boys from Syracuse for J.C. Williamson's, and I was scheduled to do Bye Bye Birdie, and they cancelled it. So I had a fairly virulent stage, jazz club, singing, Review 61 and 2, of course, which was the benchmark for variety. Channel 9 relentlessly plagiarised them. They used to bring me down to duplicate the numbers. Barry Crocker's show did the same thing. Everybody copied from Review 61. It was a benchmark show. The look of the studio, the all white, the big copper kettle drums, Digby Wolf, casual elegance, and
It was a fantastic show. I loved
and then very clever people, involved in promoting and writing and directing and doing it. And I was the Australian singing star of it, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. Then it came a time when you departed these shores for the US of A.
Well, that wasn't so much voluntary. It was a quest within every heart, because there were no opportunities in Australia when I was young. We had no reach internationally. But there was the desire to make it overseas, and everybody went to England. You couldn't make it in America. Very few people did, although Ron did. He played in some good movies. He was former Clark Kent. Ron...
Taylor?
No. Then, of course, there was Rod Taylor.
Yeah.
There were several, I can't think of the names of that actor. He did quite well. And a few Australian actors made it big time in America, by steeping themselves in America or contacts, I don't know how or why. And I used to see them and I used to work with them, but there was no reach, and in every heart there was a desire to do something. So I thought I'd go to America, give it a shot. I should have gone after Review 61 and 2 when they wanted me to go. And I was arrogant enough to think that we would adopt a very original landscape here, and it was quite the opposite. So I agitated for Australian content.
Yes.
And I formed a committee. It became the TV Make It Australian Committee. And for 4 years was certainly the most influential, and it's been stated by people like Simon Crean and his father that it was the most pivotal and seminal and important cultural movement. And I got John Gorton to change the regulations and bring the Packers and Fairfaxes into line with Australian culture, because they weren't interested in Australian culture, and they're still not. It's like Groundhog Day. They're interested in profits, that's all. And as though that's justification for owning the Australian airwaves. Well, I've never agreed with that. I'm more interested in how we create our culture, and you have to do that through the airwaves. And anybody that's an impediment to that, then you've got to challenge them. And I did, but I paid a very heavy price.
Yes.
And Clyde Packer told me, sitting as close as I am to you, across a desk like this at Channel 9, after I'd got Bob Hawke to reinstate me, after Packer had banned me from the channel, that you'll never work in Australian television again. And he offered me a lifetime contract with the 9 network. You can do anything, compare, host, dance, sing, you're a clever blagger, blah, 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 blah. We'll give you a lifetime contract. We'll always find something for you, but you've got to give up this TV Make It Australian crap. You're the guts, you're its brains, you're the drive. Get off that and you can have a lifetime contract. I frankly admit, and I told him to get nicked, but I went into the men's room and I was filming Division 4 where we used to film it on a Friday at Channel 9. And I went into the men's room and looked myself in the mirror and I said, what have you done to your family's security? This is a very, very formidable adversary. And to tell him to get nicked is going to be pretty tough on you, and it was. And he said to me, you'll never work in Australian television again. After I'd spoken to him. And I never have. and despite many tries and many attempts. Now, I was a dual Australian representative in 2 sports, rugby junior, rugby league, squash, world championship teams, New South Wales undefeated, Victoria. You think I know a little bit about sport? I was a 1-handicap golfer, at the top clubs in Sydney. I know sport. And I even offered myself as a sideline commentator or anything to try and get in, but I just got the cold shoulder all the time everywhere. And if I put up an idea, which I'm good at creating, I never got a second look. So I paid a pretty heavy price, and that's when the American ambassador, who was a fan of my show, I asked him how I would get to meet. He said, you'd get in under the especially gifted and unique, because haven't you got some songs with Glenn Campbell and Dean Martin on the hit parade? And I said, yes. And he said, and didn't you write that paper for the government on? And I said, yes, because he was a very avid fan and a follower. His name was Ed Green. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, look, you should appeal under the specially gifted and unique. You form your publishing company in America. He said, I think you'll get in, because there was no quota. They didn't have a quota system from Australia, little old Australia. You had plenty from England, but nothing from Australia.
Right.
For Olivia Newton-John, a lot of the Australian artists, like the English-born people like Olivia Newton-John, the Bee Gees and all that, they went to England. From there, got the permission to work in America. That's how that worked in those days. It was just a systemic logic. And to do it from Australia was almost impossible. But I did it and got that, and in I go.
You said about the Love Boat. That's I used to love watching that show.
Well, I was his first captain. Unfortunately, it sailed without me. But the funny story about it is that when I did it and I saw the things, I said, I look bloody awful. I look 12. And somebody remarked, you look like some kid on the boat that's escaped and put the captain's uniform on. I looked so young for some strange, stupid reason. And they really didn't know what they were doing in the first pilot. Because what they do in Hollywood, and they do it here too, is once something's not deemed a success, everybody gets wiped. They don't keep anything. So everybody gets wiped, and that's how I got wiped. But and I said to my agent, Maya Mishkin, who was a very prominent agent. He had Lee Marvin, Celeste Holm, all Academy Award-winning actors, Richard Dreyfuss. He represented those, and he was furious about it. And I said, Maya, he's right. I'm totally miscast in that role. And incidentally, they don't know what the hell they're doing with the crew. They had no intermingling. They did it like Love American style. They just put us in at each half an hour with a little vignette. But there was no intermingling, and it proved it right. They eventually went with Davin McLeod, avuncular, big sideburns, bald head, lovely, charming, sweet man, nice face, avuncular looking, no threat to the passengers' romantic interests.
That's right.
So they were right. But I was the first captain. Captain
Good
Thomas
for you.
Ford. Yeah.
Good for you. Now, tell me about the pirate movie.
Oh, yes.
1981?
Yes, mate. Yeah, well, that was a revolution in Australia.
Yeah.
I came back thinking I was bringing Pandora's box back, and with all of these wonderful gifts from America of the experience, and I was going to do this movie. Instead of that, I got assassinated in the public square. I've still got the knife wounds. Everybody attacked me as that ugly Australian, American, blah, 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 blah. And I was right and they were wrong. It's that simple. I said, it's not the name on your passport. And one day I challenged, I tried to form the Australian Screen Actors Guild, and they assassinated me, and they sent hooligans along, and I've had apologies since, but it doesn't matter much. And they attacked me as the ugly American for bringing 2 kids in to do the show, like Christy McNichol and Christopher Atkins. They were the #1 box stars in the world. He'd come out of Blue Lagoon.
That's right.
She'd come out of Family, and this wonderful picture with Marsha Mason, which was a big hit. And she was, and Christopher, that's how I got to deal with 20th Century. David Joseph, who was my partner on the project, sold him the idea that, who would you give us a deal on? We were unknown Australian producers, but we had this wonderful idea to do it. And we went to see Joseph Papp, who was the doyen of Broadway, to try and get him to collaborate with us and do a Frankie Avalon and a Funicello beach movie of Gilbert and Sullivan. Well, he was horrified. Bloody, how dare you? And I said to him, Joe, what are you talking about? I said, Gilbert and Sullivan are satirists. They were taking the mickey out of the Raj, I said, for goodness sake. I said, it's time I got an update. Anyway, they went with Universal, with Linda Ronstadt, Kevin Kline, and all this wonderful American actors. They spent twice the budget that I spent, and the picture didn't even get a release. Didn't even get a film release. They showed it on television.
Right.
And mine got a general release from in 2,500 theatres. Finished up in 50.
And my information says the first Aussie movie to receive general release.
Absolutely. Well, they had Gallipoli, and they couldn't get a general release from Paramount. They had what they call a classic cinema release, which is 35 cinemas, spread between New York and Los Angeles. I finished up in cinemas right across America in a summertime release, and it unfortunately founded on two grounds. A, they edited it to the point where a lot of the jokes didn't make sense because they were too sensitive about, one of them, the girl said, and don't say knickers, and they said, oh, it sounds like niggers, so we have to take that out. And another one was when Gary McDonald did his show about the furt and the horse was furting and what furt and all this sort of stuff. They took all that out and it was very funny. And then they took my joke, which was my best joke in the movie, when I said, tell me, men, after all these years at sea, what have you missed most? And they all yell out, sex. And there was one black guy in the crew who said watermelon. That was the joke. Sex was easy. Anybody would have said that. But watermelon was the joke. And they cut it out. So they kept doing it, and they took 20 minutes out of the film, which I think emasculated it. And I had a big argument with 20 about it, but I was powerless. I was first-time Australian producer. And they had their way with us, as Hollywood does, including with the receipts from the show. We never saw any massive returns. And, of course, what ruined the film, really, for its release in America, they printed so much poison in Australian variety about it. A guy called Max Harris, I think his name was, and Paul Harris or something, some Harris guy. And he just vilified it and told lies about it because I challenged the Prime Minister and had to get the certificate reinstated. They took its Australian certificate from it.
Really?
And thereby jeopardised the tax investment. I went to Canberra with the Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, and I made him, for the first time in the history, I believe, overturn the minister's decision put forward by the Australian producers that this was not an Australian qualifying film. I raised every penny through GWA, JC Williamson's, and myself were the investors in that movie. And I proved it with all the bank receipts and the contracts. And they all just blatantly told lies because it didn't suit their interest, because they were jealous. It was that simple. They had never seen it. They didn't believe me. Joe Straczynski, who headed up the AFC, said, oh, there's no way that you're going to get a general release from... And I showed him the contract. And despite him having seen it, and I had him cited and stamped, he told the government that it wasn't an Australian film, that it was a 20th Century Fox financed film. It wasn't. It was totally financed in Australia. So that was your little story there, mate. And then I went on to do Flight of the Navigator, where I had a heart attack, and I finished up being taken off the credits because they couldn't get insurance with a guy who was in UCLA with a double heart attack. And I truthfully believe, and my family does too, that there was the pressure for 18 months of the pirate movie and just getting it done in this country that gave me the heart attack, because I never had a problem since. So that's the little story of the pirate movie, mate.
Well, you got awarded with an OAM in 2013, earlier this year, with the Australia Day Awards. What was that like? Bit of thrill?
It's a wonderful thing, when you go through your life and you survive the trenches, and the harrowing details of your life. And I do firmly believe that the things that I have done to try and advance Australian culture have been a constant beacon in my life. I've always done it. It's not like something new or it's a fad that I adopt because it might make me popular or unpopular. Quite the contrary. It's been very costly to me. And to be acknowledged at long last, in some small manner by your government for the contributions you've made to the advance of your culture, it's nice. It's comforting. Look, if you didn't say that, you'd be lying.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful acknowledgement.
Well, looking at what you've done,
and it's an
I
honour.
think it is an honour, and it's well deserved. What are you doing now?
Now, my goodness. Well, the left side of my brain's doing a science project with La Trobe Technology and Fusion Laboratory around an RFID appliance that'll track, trace, find, monitor and report, and monitor the temperature of food, and on buffets and things. It's a very interesting device that I've created with... I had a partner who died, and he and I created this idea, And it's got to the stage now where we've gone beyond proof of concept into an actual product that works. And in fact, I'm meeting with them this week up there and the government, because I think the government now want to get involved. I've had to carry it alone with my investors, and it's been a bit tough. And then the other side of my brain, my creative side of the brain in show business, is I went to see the School Spectaculars and was mortified by the absence of Australian original material. We don't develop musical drama in this country. We never have. Can you think of a good Australian musical play? We don't do it. We borrow too easily from overseas, and the guys that, well, it's a pedigreed show and I can make money out of this. They don't always make money, incidentally. And they are unfortunately supported by a lot of government grants. And I think that's wrong. I think there's got to be a redress, and I think that we've got to do something to create the next step for children beyond school spectaculars. What are we training them in music and dance for? If we can't give them avenues of exploring their own original ideas in it. I don't want to see another tribute to Cole Porter, to Irving Berlin, to Stephen Sondheim by my kids at school. I want to see my kids doing something. I don't mean, once upon a time, in a billabong. I don't mean leaning on a rail and reciting Banjo Patterson. I mean getting vibrant about your creative culture that you live in today. It's the same argument, Alex, that I presented to the government in
those years ago.
In 1969. I said, I have a vested interest in Australian culture. I'm Australian. I want to hear my voice. I want to hear my directors, my producers, my writers, my directors doing Australian themes and product. That's all. That reflect my culture. I don't want to see one more English on the buses. They're fine, grist for the mill, entertainment. They're not your culture. And when they become the main fare at the table, they become your culture. I don't want that. That was my argument then. It's my argument today. And what I wanted to do was, and I've written a special stage play called SOS Earth.
All right.
With two magnificent themes, the environment and what your personal responsibility is to it. Not the mining industry, not the coal miners, not the this, not the that, what you do on a daily basis. There are 3 billion children on this planet, and they proliferate the planet with dirt. We're polluters. We don't control the climate. We don't control the universe, but we do control our bad habits.
We do, indeed.
And the other aspect to it is personal respect for each other, Alex. We've got to teach our kids. Today, media has made stars out of underbellies, out of sopranos. This is scurrilous nonsense. It's knavery at its highest conceit because you're making images that the children admire. They've got all the money, all the glamour, all the fast cars, all the girls, all the success things that come with success are all given to the bad guys. And they are bad guys. Have we got any brains at all and wonder why our kids are violent?
Yeah.
Why they emulate this sort of thing? There's nothing to countervail it. And I say to people, look, I'm not asking for the exclusion of the $7 billion that we spend annually on the arts, on overseas ideas and products. Okay, but I want some room for creating originality, a footprint for our children to say, I can be a great set designer. I can be a great costume designer. I can be a terrific choreographer. There's a 19, 20-year-old out there now that I want that's going to do that for me in this stage show. That's what I want to do. I want to involve the youth, the education departments, and it's a hard slog. When you start talking original in this country, you may as well have a bomb in your hand. Why aren't you spending some of that money on creating an environment, a desire platform for young people to say, wow, this is great, I can create, I want to write songs for that, I want to design costumes for that, I want to do sets for that. Not something that's formulated overseas, but it just comes in and you're just copying.
Yeah.
Doesn't do it for me.
Well, let's hope it's successful for you.
Thank you, Alex. Well, Division 4 was, wasn't it?
It was indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to sign off the program and play one of your other recordings, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. And this was conducted by Jeff Hales, and I think he arrange this for you?
Oh, he did beautifully. It's I always did my own vocal lines, but Jeff did a beautiful arrangement on this. And Bobby Russell, the writer of this,
yes,
he said, and his daughter, I went to see them in Los Angeles, and she said, Dad says that this is the best version of his song that he's ever heard. That was a great compliment.
We're going to enjoy it now, and I thank you once again for your time, Ted.
Alex and listeners, thank you.
The road is long, with many a winding turn that leads us to who knows where, who knows where. For I'm strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. So on we go. His welfare is my concern. No burden is he to bear. We'll get there. For I know that he would not encumber me. He ain't heavy, he's just my brother. If I'm laden at all, I'm laden with this sadness that everyone's heart isn't filled with the gladness of love for one another. It's a long, long road from which there is no return. So while we're on the way to bed, why not share? And the load, it doesn't weigh me down at all. You ain't heavy, 'cause you're